Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Scientist in Every Florida School live stream event, where we're going to bring you sinkholes today with Dr. John Jaeger from the University of Florida. He'll be telling a little bit more about himself in just a moment, but first, we want to just quickly remind you that you can use the chat box feature to write any questions that you have for our scientists, and we'll be sure to get to those very shortly. So without further ado, let's go ahead and explore sinkholes. John?
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming in here today to see this video and lecture. Let me quit out of this real quick. Hold on. Just a little bit about my background. I'm a geologist at the University of Florida. And I primarily look at the kind of rocks that form near the Earth's surface that are called sediments. And I'm going to just kind of work through this today a little bit and kind of talk about sinkholes, which you may or may not have in your backyard, but they certainly are a thing here in Florida. So I grew up in Northern California, kind of near the ocean. And so I always really liked the ocean a lot when I was a kid. And some of you probably get to spend time at the ocean. And I just got really interested in what was like out underneath the ocean. I spent a lot of time just staring out there. And so I was really lucky. I was able to go to college and study oceanography and get to go out on boats and study what's out there on the bottom of the ocean. It's really expensive and really hard to go out in boats all the time. So I quickly got used to working on the coastline. But I love glaciers. So when I got near the coastline, a lot of the work I've done is up in Alaska, going out on boats and collecting sediments from underneath the seafloor. But I do a lot here in Florida too. And this is just a picture of me out in the salt marsh, all muddy. I love getting dirty and muddy, and I've been very, very fortunate to have a job where they pay me to get muddy and dirty all the time. So if you like that, you definitely need to think about going into this kind of science because it's really cool. You get to be out in nature and you learn a lot of interesting stuff. So today what we're going to talk about are sinkholes. And I don't know if you've got any near where you are. I'm guessing probably not. But in Florida, they're a real issue. And so what I'm going to try to do is explain a little bit about what Florida's geology is like. So all the rocks that are underneath you. And then give you a little understanding of how they form. And so you can understand risk that you might have. And so sometimes sinkholes like this form. And that is actually more common in big cities where infrastructure fails, like a water pipe breaks and it destroys all the stuff underneath. But Florida is known for its geological sinkholes. So if you don't know what a sinkhole is, Nova on PBS had a really good episode a few years ago. And so here's the preview for it.
They come from below.
Oh my God.
Strike without warning.
The floor just collapsed.
Sending victims to their graves.
Gone.
Gone. Nova explores a menace beneath us.
Sinkholes. Sinkholes.
Can scientists slow their progress or predict when they'll strike again? Sinkholes buried alive on Nova.
Yes, so if you really want to learn a lot more about them, find that Nova episode online and watch it. And that's the thing that a lot of people get scared about, is getting sucked into sinkholes really quickly. So here's some photographs. Here's an example of a big sinkhole that opened up in Florida, Winter Park, kind of Orlando area. We just had one near my house here in Gainesville that opened up about a month ago, about the same size, right under people's houses. So there are places in Florida, if you look at, this is kind of an aerial photograph looking down at Florida, Lake Wales, so kind of a little bit northeast of where you are. You'll see all these lakes. If you ever look at images of Florida from above, you see lots and lots of round lakes. Well, those were all formed by sinkholes. So if you ever look out and you see a lot of little round lakes around, at some point, it was a sinkhole. So, but they may have formed a long time ago. So where are sinkholes? Sinkholes form when you get kind of a rock type made of limestone that dissolves from water going into the ground. It's acidic. So in the United States, all the areas you see here in blue are places that have limestone under the ground that can dissolve, and some other rocks type too. And you'll notice pretty much all of Florida has this kind of limestone. But as I said before, humans can do a lot of damage. So this is an example from Japan where a water main broke and a big sinkhole opened up. And you can see all of the infrastructure's fallen in. So sinkholes can kind of form anywhere, but the ones in Florida are related to the geology. So how do sinkholes form? Well, when it rains, that water goes in the ground. And that rain actually has some acid in it, right? That can dissolve away certain kinds of rocks, especially those that are made out of limestone, kind of the white, chalky kind of rock. And rocks have kind of fractures in them. The water gets into it, and then the water sits there as groundwater, and it can dissolve away the rock over time. Oops, sorry. Sorry about that. You get the dissolution of the rock here. So why Florida? Why do we have so many different types of sinkholes forming? Well, here's the geology of Florida. This is called a geologic map. And the colors that you see here in the map are different types of rocks. And so in Florida, you'll notice it's got a lot of different kinds of rock types, but pretty much all of them are made up of sediments. They're either like quartz sand or limestone. And so I'm going to show you an example of what happens when you're able to drill down into it and make maps. So this is called a geologic cross section. It's like if you could drill down into the ground and see what rocks are there. So this is in the north up near Georgia, and this is where you are down here. And each of these colors represents a different layer of rock. Now, the really important thing for you to know is that the limestones are primarily all up here in North Florida. You have limestones where you live too, but they're all very much right near the surface, this little kind of orange layer that you have here, okay? This blue limestone is the part that dissolves in North Florida and creates those big sinkholes. And you'll notice that it's very, very deep. This is 500 feet, right? This is very, very deep down there. So the sinkholes in Florida are going to form where this limestone is primarily near the surface. And so just because of that, you know, you're pretty lucky down in South Florida because of that. So here's what a sinkhole looks like. And this is from a quarry here in North Florida. Can you spot the sinkhole? So the different types of rocks that you see here are limestone in white. And then you'll notice there's a clay layer, right, that has filled this, and there's sand on top. The really dangerous sinkholes form when you have these kinds of conditions where you have clay that's near the surface that can fall in. So the kind of sinkholes that we have in sort of very far North Florida, or probably around where you might be, are these things that are called solution sinkholes. And what happens is this very slow process. Over time, the rain gets into that limestone and dissolves it. And usually you've got a little bit of sand on top, and then maybe that sand falls in, right? But this is a slow process. And this is kind of, if you've got a sinkhole in South Florida, this is probably the kind that you're going to have. The really dangerous ones are the ones we have up here. So anywhere probably from about Tampa north to Gainesville, and then a few other places up here, had these really dangerous ones. So that video I showed you of the houses falling in, these are the kinds of sinkholes, and these are called cover collapse. And they form because you have a clay layer on top sitting over a cavern that's dissolved. And that clay, if you've ever played with modeling clay, you know you can like stretch it out a little bit and it'll hold up, right? But if you stretch it out too thin, it'll break. Eventually, that's what happens. And so if you build your house on top and it breaks and that water goes away, boom, it collapses in, and it can happen very quickly, just like it happened here in Gainesville not too long ago. So here's a little video to kind of explain how these really dangerous cover collapse sinkholes happen. So limestone on the bottom, clay in the middle, sand on top. And that's what happens when all of a sudden that cavern doesn't have water in it anymore and it doesn't have support to hold that up, everything collapses in. So these are the kind of sinkholes that happen in certain areas. So again, this is what it's like. All right. So here's the really important stuff for you to know. This is another map. So geologists really like maps, and I loved maps as a kid. Just kind of looking at where things were. And so we use a lot of maps. And so the colors here represent the different kinds of sinkhole areas. So up here is Tallahassee in the Panhandle. Gainesville is right here. Tampa is here, and then you're down here. So the colors are important. So if it's yellow or green, these areas are the ones that have the slow forming sinkholes, where you have a little bit of sand on top of the limestone, and the limestone dissolves away very slowly. So that's pretty much the case for everything south of in South Florida. So the really dangerous ones are the areas all in blue, this blue color here. This is the area where the limestone is thick underneath and the clay is just the right thickness where it can just break and fall. And so you'll notice that some of the worst areas, in fact, for sinkholes are all in just around Tampa and just north Tampa. These areas are the ones that have most of the really big sinkholes that happen quickly. So down here, you'll notice there's not a lot. And over here is another map that shows in these little white dots where most of the sinkholes form. And again, you're down here and you'll notice there's not a lot of white dots. So not too many of these sinkholes form very quickly. So why? Why not so many sinkholes in South Florida? So one of the interesting things is South Florida has got very different geology in some ways than North Florida. And a key thing to know is that the sea level where the shoreline is goes up and down and can cover the state over very long geologic periods. And we know this by looking at around the world. And this is a figure that shows time on the x-axis going 500,000 years back. And these little wiggly lines are our best estimates of what the level of the ocean has done over really long time periods. And this has to do with forming really big ice sheets in North America. About 20,000 years ago, North America was covered by ice that was over 1.5 miles thick in places like Chicago. And so that water has to come out of the ocean and go into the ice. And then when that ice melts, it goes back into the ocean and causes the sea level to go up. And so these wiggly lines, we know that sea level goes up and down. Florida is very flat lying. And so it's very sensitive to changes in sea level, as you might learn. So what does that mean for Florida and its geology? So here is a kind of a map showing in color different elevations of Florida. Dark brown is very high. This green is very low. So you know in South Florida, your elevation is very flat and it's very close to sea level. This is what it's like now in the modern. You have this continental shelf off the coast, very flat, ocean goes far out. But if we go back in time, what we see is that as you drop that sea level down, the water goes into ice, the shoreline moves outward. And so this is where the shoreline was about 20,000 years ago, way out, way out there. Where you live right now was high and dry in the middle of the state, okay? And so what ended up happening is over time, you basically see sea level, right? Is it been different levels? And the most important one for the geology of where you live is what happened 120,000 years ago, which may seem like a long time to you, but for us geologists, it's not very far. We had a lot of melting of ice back then, and sea level was probably about 15 feet higher than it is now. What that meant is that South Florida, kind of where you live, was underwater. And this is why we worry about melting ice sheets right now, because there's a lot of potential then to flood these areas. So you are underwater in this area. What does that mean for the geology? Well, if we drill down into the rocks, we see that actually South Florida, and this is a map, looks just like the Florida Keys do right now. If you've ever been down to the Florida Keys, you know there are a chain of islands that go out. Well, there was a chain of islands that formed in South Florida as well. So where you live, if you drill down deep enough, you're going to find the remnants of an old island that was there. And so this is what we call reef tracks. And all of the geology of South Florida, pretty much underneath it, is made up of what looks like the modern Bahamas right now. And so it's made up of two kinds of rocks. If you live near Miami, you're more likely to have these limestones made up of corals. And this is called the Key Largo limestone. But for where you live, there's a lot more of these flat line deposits. This is a picture of the Bahamas right now. And all of this mud that you see here is made up of sand and mud of carbonate, limestone. And so this is the kind of environment we think South Florida looked like when the sea level was higher. And so this creates limestone, but it's not very thick limestone. So because of that, then you don't have to worry about big sinkholes in South Florida. So that very thin limestone here is kind of what you all see underneath here. So one of the big questions is, okay, how do I find sinkholes? So sinkholes can be found in your house, in your neighborhood, if you've got enough money. It's not hard for us to find where they are. It just takes time and money. So some of the ways that we can figure out where sinkholes are is to drill down into the ground. And if all of a sudden you hit a big cavity, an opening, you know you've got a sinkhole. In North Florida, they do a lot of this on roads. If the road is starting to buckle or dip, Florida Transportation will come out and drill a series of holes to see if there's a sinkhole underneath it. Another thing you can do is use what's known as ground penetrating radar. It's kind of like using a sensing tool that will image down below the bottom and see images. And this is kind of what you're seeing here. Here's the ground surface. And these are layers of rock, and you can see underneath here, there was a sinkhole that had formed at some point. Another thing we can use is we actually put electricity in the ground, and we measure how fast and how much of the electricity flows in the ground. Where you've got sinkholes, the electricity flows faster because water will carry, the salts in the water will carry the electricity. The rock doesn't carry the electricity so well. So from that, we can make these really nice maps like this that you see here that show where all the sinkholes are. Again, we have the science to do all of this. It just takes the money to be able to do it. So as we always say in the business, if you're worried, consult a professional geologist. A professional geologist is someone that has taken a lot of tests and has a license that says they really know a lot about geology. And they're allowed to go into courtrooms and tell people like what is really happening with the area. So in North Florida, we have, and this is a map of Gainesville with different layers of rock. So elevation is this dark brown, low elevation is green, and all of these little pock marks that you see here, right? These little tiny divots and holes are all sinkholes here in Gainesville. So here we've got to worry about it because here's that limestone and here's that clay layer. Where you live though, again, you don't have this clay layer right above all this big limestone. So this is kind of what we covered today. And this is just a basic overview of sinkholes. And if you want to learn more about it, the state of Florida has a Florida Geological Survey that has lots of great maps and data that you can look at that will tell you where these sinkholes are. And this is what we as geologists rely on, is for people that pay money in taxes to the state, keeps the survey running and provides us with the information we need for sinkholes. So with that, that is my quick overview of sinkholes, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Dr. Jaeger, thanks so much for teaching us all about sinkholes today. We're going to transition at this point to our Q&A portion of today's presentation. So if any of our viewers have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box and I'll ask them on your behalf. We're going to start with a question, which is, Can humans speed up or slow down the rate at which sinkholes form?
Very good question. And the answer is yes. So let me find a good example of this. So I'll play this video and I'll leave it till the end. So think about how humans can influence sinkholes here. Remember, the water under the ground is providing the support for those layers of rock above. If the humans pull the water out of the ground, it removes that support. So this is what nature might look like. But if you pull this water out, now what happens? Whoop, this happens. And so this has happened many places around Tampa. A very famous example of this is a big strawberry festival that happened. They were worried about the strawberries freezing in February, right before a big festival. So they pumped all of this water out to spray on the strawberries to keep them from freezing really bad. Well, all that pumping of groundwater out quickly caused all of these sinkholes to form. And you could find them forming on I-4 and a lot of places. So yes, humans can cause sinkholes to form quickly. Humans can slow it down if you've got the money by pumping concrete into those caverns and filling them up. But again, that costs money.
Sure. Our next question comes from Lori, who asks, is fracking a concern for sinkholes?
Not in Florida. Fracking is, what fracking is taking water and injecting it into the rock layers below, causing them to break apart, usually to get oil and gas out. There is some very deep oil and gas in the parts of Florida where you live, but they're very deep. And I know there's been some discussion about trying to frack those rocks, but they're made of limestone, just like the rocks we're talking about. And limestone is not the type of rock that they use fracking for. Those are called shales, which are the kind of layered heavy rocks that you find up further north. So I think there's been a very little interest in actually trying to do any kind of fracking in Florida.
Thank you.
South Florida.
Our next question is, how deep was the deepest sinkhole recorded?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, that's a good one. So in Florida, most of the ones are, I don't know, maybe a couple 100 feet, but there are sinkholes, really cool ones down in the Yucatan in Mexico that are like 1,000 feet deep, really deep ones. And you get divers that go down into them. And so they're really cool because they formed over very long time periods. The ones in Florida are a lot younger.
Rebecca is curious, what should you do if you think your house is built on a sinkhole and the foundation is eroding? Asking for a friend.
Yes. So I've had a lot of these questions recently here in Gainesville because of what happened near my house. And all I can say is you should, call a professional geologist and have them come take a look at your house and see what they can do. They can run some of these tests that I mentioned. And if you have real sinkholes forming underneath there, usually what they recommend is pumping concrete underneath your house.
Next, Pedro asks, how common are sinkholes? Are they more or less or as common as hurricanes?
Oh, they're much less common than hurricanes, I guess, is the way to think of it. Because the hurricanes happen several times every year. Sometimes they'll hit Florida. But sinkholes, the ones that will cause the damage generally are every couple of years in Florida. So I don't know, they might be about the same, come to think of it.
Great. And again, just a quick reminder, if anybody else has questions, feel free to write them in the chat. Our next one for now is, how many different types of sinkholes are there?
Well, there are generally kind of three types, well, two main types of sinkholes. So the two main kinds are the solution subsidence ones and the cover collapse. So the solution subsidence ones, oops, let me go back and I'll show you, are these ones where you've got limestone right near the surface. And it gradually over time just dissolves away and it forms kind of those round lakes and ponds. And then the other kind are the cover collapse ones where you've got that sort of thick layer of clay sitting over the top.
And our last question for now, Daniel is curious, what are our other areas of the world outside of Florida where sinkholes are a big concern?
Oh, good question. Well, limestone's a very common rock that you'll find below you. And There are a lot of places that have limestone near the surface. And so a good example of that would be anywhere where you've seen marble statues. So think about world history. Where is marble found? Remember, limestone is the primary rock that the Great Pyramids of Egypt are made out of. That's all limestone. You've got in Greece, you've got Roman temples or Greek temples, and then in Rome, they're made out of marble. So there's a lot of limestone around the Mediterranean region and all the way through Saudi Arabia and into Iran. And then there's some very famous limestone areas in China with beautiful landscapes. So limestone's pretty much found not quite everywhere, but certain areas around the central part of the planet primarily.
Great, thank you. And we just had a few more come in, so we'll wrap up with those questions. From Melody asks, where did it go? Are potholes related to sinkholes?
Well, potholes, usually like up north, if you've lived in New York and places like that, they form because the ground freezes in the wintertime. So water is really good at breaking things apart. If you've ever accidentally put a glass bottle full of water in a freezer, you come back and it's shattered. That's because those ice crystals can break things apart. So most potholes in roads form because it melts during the day and freezes at night and breaks it apart. That could happen in parts of Florida, but those road potholes generally are created by freeze thaw. But some bigger ones could be related to washout of ground underneath it. And so then it technically is a sinkhole. It would be one of these kinds of sinkholes.
What is the relationship between a sinkhole and an earthquake? Has a sinkhole ever caused an earthquake?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yes. In fact, every sinkhole, when it forms, is creating an earthquake. It's so small, though, you can't feel it. It is causing the ground to shake around, right? Really small, slow movements. And so if you've got a really, really sensitive seismometer that can measure the shaking, it'll see these. And sometimes we can see those in seismographs if they're really sensitive. In fact, we've got scientists right now using seismographs to study where sinkholes might form. But usually they don't create really big earthquakes. They're going to knock anything down.
Sure. And Michelle asks, are there certain months of the year when sinkholes happen more often?
That's another really good question. So there is a idea that there's sinkhole season in Florida, which is typically thought to be the dry season. So we're about to go into the dry season in Florida when it doesn't rain very much. And when that happens, the groundwater levels will drop because it's not raining every day. And if you think about that cartoon I showed you, when you drop that water level, it leaves a cavern that might cause collapses. So that's a hypothesis that we have. We just don't have enough data actually to sense when sinkholes really do happen. They're happening out in the forests and the woods when there's no one around to actually know where they happen. So there's a thought there could be a sinkhole season, which is the dry season, but when we actually collect data of when they happen, we don't really see any correlation between the two.
And our last question for this morning will be, are there sinkholes in the ocean as well?
Yes. Yes, they are. They're out there. We just don't have enough maps to find them. We know that there are places off of Tampa and places off of the East Coast, but mainly off of Tampa, where there are these big kind of low points in the ground. And so they must have formed when sea level was lower. I showed you that map when the coastlines were way, way out there. Well, that was all dry ground, right? Where the rainwater could get in and cause sinkholes to form. So most likely there are lots of sinkholes out in the Gulf of Mexico we can't see.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jaeger, for teaching us all about sinkholes and answering all of our questions this morning. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you answered your questions.
Absolutely. At this point, Stephanie's going to take over and with some concluding remarks for today's presentation.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And we hope that you'll tune in for more of our live streams with scientists in every Florida school. A huge thank you to Dr. John Jaeger for being with us here today. Teachers, you can learn more about our programming by visiting our website and following us on social media. And we've put in the chat box the Request a Scientist form so that you can request individualized classroom visits with scientists at any time. Once again, thank you. We look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.